Sophia almost canceled 3 times. The first time was Tuesday, when she convinced herself the whole idea was ridiculous. A blind date set up by her coworker Dana, who had described the man as successful, tall, and genuinely kind, which in Sophia's experience usually meant arrogant, impatient, and kind only when it benefited him. The second time was Thursday, when she stood in front of her mirror for 20 minutes and decided her navy wrap dress made her look like she was trying too hard, then changed into something else, then changed back, then sat on the edge of her bed, feeling tired of the whole performance before it had even started. The third time was Friday afternoon, 40 minutes before she was supposed to leave, when her mother called from the kitchen in a voice that was a little too slow and a little too confused, asking where the stove knobs had gone. They were right there, where they had always been, and Sophia felt that familiar cold drop in her stomach that had become part of her daily routine since her mother's episode 3 months ago. She couldn't leave her alone, not on a Friday evening. Not when she was having one of her foggy days. So she did the only thing she could do. She called the restaurant, explained the situation to the hostess, and then sat down next to her mother at the kitchen table and said, "You're coming with me tonight, Mama." Evelyn looked up from her tea. "Where are we going? Dinner? With who?" Sophia paused. "Someone I haven't met yet." The restaurant was called Verona. It sat on the 12th floor of a building in the Gold Coast neighborhood, all soft lighting and dark wood, and the kind of quiet that expensive places cultivate deliberately. Sophia had never eaten there. She had walked past it twice and never thought it was meant for her. She arrived 7 minutes late with her mother on her arm, and the hostess smiled like this was completely normal and walked them to a corner table where a man was already standing. He was tall. That part was accurate. Dark hair, sharp jaw, wearing a charcoal jacket over a black shirt, no tie. He looked like the kind of person who was used to rooms adjusting to him rather than the other way around. Sophia opened her mouth before she fully reached the table. "I'm so sorry. I know this is completely not what you expected, and I completely understand if this is weird. But I couldn't leave her alone tonight. And I didn't have anyone else, and I should have called ahead. Well, I called the restaurant, but I should have called you directly, and I don't even have your number yet, which is a whole other issue. Sophia." She stopped. The man smiled. It was a calm smile, not the strained, polite kind she had braced herself for. "I'm Adrian." He turned to her mother. "And you must be her mother. Please, sit down. I already asked them to bring a third setting." Evelyn studied him for a moment, with the sharp look she still had on her good days. "You don't seem surprised. Dana warned me Sophia might try to cancel," he said simply. "I'm glad she didn't." Sophia sat down, feeling completely off balance in a way she hadn't anticipated. Dinner moved in a direction she hadn't expected from the first minute. Adrian didn't perform. That was the only word she could find for it later, when she tried to explain the evening to Dana over the phone. Most men on a first date performed. They talked about themselves in careful, curated ways. They laughed a little too loudly. They asked questions, while clearly waiting for their turn to speak again. Adrian just talked. He asked Evelyn about her life with genuine interest, listened when she answered, remembered details and followed up on them. When Evelyn mentioned she used to love cooking, he asked what dishes, and they spent 10 minutes discussing the specific technique for getting a proper crust on cornbread. Sophia mostly watched. It was a strange feeling, being on a date where you were almost unnecessary. But it wasn't a bad feeling. It was more like watching someone reveal their character without realizing they were being observed. At one point, Evelyn laughed at something Adrian said, a real laugh, and Sophia looked at her mother's face and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 3 months. The food was extraordinary. Adrian ordered for the table after asking what they didn't eat, and everything arrived in the right order at the right pace, and at no point did Sophia feel like a problem that needed to be managed. She was just a person, eating dinner. It was near the end of the evening, when the dessert plates had been cleared and Evelyn was telling a long story about a bus driver she had once known in the neighborhood she grew up in, that Sophia noticed something change in Adrian's face. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. But she was watching him closely by that point, and she saw the exact moment something shifted behind his eyes. Evelyn had just described the diner where she used to work. A roadside place outside the city, she said. Nothing fancy, just good food and people who needed somewhere warm to sit. And something in Adrian's expression went very still. Not uncomfortable, not bored, still, like a man who had just heard something that mattered and was being careful not to show it yet. "What was the name of the diner?" he asked. His voice was light, easy, but Sophia noticed he had set down his coffee cup. Evelyn thought for a moment. "Millie's, out on Route 14. It's been closed for years." Adrian nodded slowly. "Good food?" he asked. "Honest food," Evelyn said. "That's what we always called it." He smiled at that, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. On the drive home, with Evelyn asleep in the passenger seat, Sophia kept thinking about that moment, about the way Adrian had gone quiet, about the careful, measured way he had asked a question that sounded casual but didn't feel casual at all. She didn't know what it meant, but she had the distinct feeling that something had started at that dinner table that none of them fully understood yet. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He lay in his apartment on the 43rd floor, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed quietly below him, and he kept hearing the same two words on a loop. Millie's, Route 14. He hadn't thought about that place in years. Not because the memory was painful, it wasn't, exactly, but because he had built so much distance between the person he was now and the 17-year-old boy who used to sit at that counter, that it sometimes felt like two separate lives belonging to two separate people. He got up at 2:30, poured himself a glass of water, and stood by the window looking at the lights. He had been 17 when his father died. No savings, no family nearby. His older brother had left for the West Coast 2 years earlier and had his own problems, and Adrian had aged out of any real support system almost immediately. He finished high school sleeping on a friend's couch and working part-time at a gas station that paid him mostly in cash and sometimes shorted his hours. There was a period of about 4 months, between November and March of that year, when food was a genuine problem, not a figure of speech. An actual daily problem. He remembered calculating meals, 1 in the morning if he had something, nothing at midday, whatever he could manage in the evening. He learned which grocery stores restocked their discount sections, and when. He learned how to make a small thing last, and then he found Millie's. It was a 20-minute walk from where he was staying at the time, a squat building on Route 14 with a hand-painted sign and 6 booths inside and counter seating for 8. The coffee was 75 cents, and they never rushed you. He started going on cold mornings, just to get warm, nursing a cup for as long as he could make it last. He never asked for anything he couldn't pay for. He never had to. The woman behind the counter, he never learned her name. She was just the woman with the kind eyes and the sensible shoes. Started adding things to his orders without mentioning it. A plate of eggs with his coffee. A bowl of soup he hadn't asked for. Cornbread wrapped in foil pushed across the counter with a look that made it clear she wasn't interested in discussing it. He tried to refuse once. She gave him a look that ended the conversation. He went back every week through that whole winter. Sometimes twice a week, and every time there was food. Never made into a moment, never turned into something he was supposed to feel grateful for in a visible way. Just quietly, consistently there. By spring, he had a better job and a room of his own, and he stopped going as often. He went back once to say thank you, and the place was slammed with a Saturday lunch rush, and she was moving fast between tables, and she just waved at him like he was any regular customer she was glad to see. He never went back after that. He never forgot her either. By 6 in the morning, he was already in his office. He wasn't a man who kept much from his past. He didn't romanticize where he had come from. He understood it, and he used it. But he didn't decorate it. The office reflected who he was now. Clean lines, good materials, nothing unnecessary. But there was a drawer in his desk that held a few things from before. A photograph of his father, a folded letter from his brother, years old, a transit card he couldn't explain keeping, and at the bottom, tucked inside a plain envelope, a small collection of receipts and papers from that period of his life, things he had held on to without entirely knowing why. He found it in less than a minute. A faded receipt, the ink nearly gone, from a diner on Route 14. The name at the top was printed in small block letters, Millie's Home Kitchen. He sat with it in his hand for a long time. The voice, the way she told a story, the specific words she had used. Honest food, not good food, not great food, honest food. Exactly the way he remembered it being described to him once, years ago, at that same counter. It could be a coincidence. He was a man who had built his entire career on not trusting coincidences. He pulled up what he could through straightforward channels, old business records, local directories from the late 90s, a community newspaper archive he found through a library database. It took him 2 hours. Evelyn Marchetti, former employee of Millie's Home Kitchen, Route 14, listed in a 2001 community feature about the diner closing. The article described her as having worked there for 11 years. The photograph was small and grainy, but enough. Adrian sat back in his chair. He looked at the receipt in his hand, then at the screen, then out the window at the morning sky, going pale blue over the city. He was not a person who got emotional easily. He had learned a long time ago to keep feeling and thinking in separate rooms, and to make sure thinking was always the one running the house. But something moved in him at that moment. Something old and quiet, that didn't have a clean name. The woman who had fed him through the worst winter of his life was sitting in his city right now, drinking her morning tea, with no idea that the man her daughter had gone on a date with last night owed her more than he could calculate. He picked up his phone. Not to call Sophia, not yet. He needed to be sure first. Completely sure. And then he would figure out what to do with the truth. Sophia hadn't told her mother much about Adrian. She mentioned him once, briefly, the morning after dinner, that she'd had a decent time, that he seemed like a reasonable person, that she wasn't sure where it was going. And Evelyn had nodded and said nothing, which was unusual for her. Normally she had opinions about everything. The silence felt deliberate. On Saturday morning they went to the Lakeside Community Market, the way they always did. Same time, same route. The canvas bags folded under Sophia's arm, and Evelyn in her comfortable shoes, and the light cardigan she wore, regardless of the temperature. It was their ritual. One of the ones Sophia protected without making a point of it. Some things held the week together, and this was one of them. The market ran along a stretch of the lakefront, maybe 40 vendors in a loose arrangement. Produce, bread, honey, handmade things, a stall that sold 3 types of soup every week that Evelyn considered the main event. They moved through it slowly. Evelyn liked to look before she bought. Sophia liked watching her mother move through the world on a good day. It was a good day. She saw him before he saw her. Adrian was standing near the coffee cart at the far end of the market, holding a paper cup, reading something on his phone, with the kind of focus that meant he wasn't really registering where he was. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and dark jeans. nothing like the charcoal jacket from Friday, and he looked different in daylight, less composed, more like a person. Sophia's first instinct was to steer her mother in the opposite direction. Her second instinct, arriving immediately after, was to be annoyed at her first instinct. She kept walking. He looked up when they were about 10 feet away. She watched recognition cross his face, followed immediately by something that looked like genuine pleasure, which she hadn't fully prepared herself for. Sophia. He glanced at Evelyn. Mrs. Marchetti. Good morning. Evelyn looked at him the way she looked at everything, with complete assessment and no hurry. You live near here? I run sometimes along the lakefront, he said. I saw the market from the path and stopped. He held up the coffee cup. The coffee here is better than anything near my building. It's adequate, Evelyn said, which from her was practically a glowing review. Adrian smiled. It started as 5 minutes and became 2 hours. That was the only way Sophia could explain it afterward. There was no plan, no invitation issued in a formal way. Adrian simply fell into step beside them when they moved to the next stall, and nobody told him not to. And at some point, they were all three moving through the market together, like it was something they had done before. He carried the bags without asking. He listened when Evelyn interrogated the bread vendor about his flour source. He tried the soup, the one Evelyn endorsed, and said it reminded him of something from a long time ago, though he didn't say what. Sophia noticed that he didn't talk about himself much. Most men she had spent time with filled silences with information about their own lives, their work, their opinions. Adrian asked questions and then actually waited for the answers. She noticed other things too, things she catalogued in the back of her mind without meaning to. The way he positioned himself on Evelyn's other side when the path got crowded, without making it obvious. The way he checked his phone only once in 2 hours. The way he laughed, not performed laughter, not the kind calculated to land at the right moment, just a real response when something was actually funny. She filed them all away and told herself she was being observant, not interested. They stopped for coffee, real coffee this time, at a small table outside a bakery at the edge of the market, and Evelyn, without any visible transition, began talking about her past. This happened sometimes. On her good days, Evelyn's memory was a river with no particular banks. It moved wherever it wanted to, and you followed it. She talked about the apartment she had lived in as a young woman. She talked about Sophia's father, briefly and without sadness, the way you mention someone who has been gone long enough that the grief has turned into something more like weather, always present, but no longer a storm. And then, smoothly and without any particular reason, she started talking about the diner. I worked there 11 years, she said, wrapping both hands around her cup. People think that kind of work is small, standing on your feet all day, taking orders. But I knew every regular by name. I knew who took sugar and who didn't, who was having a hard week and who needed to just sit quietly for a while. Sophia watched Adrian. She had gotten better at watching him over the course of the morning, at catching the things that moved briefly across his face before he brought it back to neutral. Right now his expression was careful, attentive in a way that went beyond polite. The diner was on Route 14, Evelyn continued, outside the city, closed in 2001. I was there till the last day. She paused. I still think about some of those customers. You'd be surprised how much you can know about a person from how they sit at a counter. I imagine you saw all kinds of people, Adrian said. His voice was steady, but he had stopped drinking his coffee. All kinds, Evelyn agreed. A lot of them just needed somewhere to land for a while. A short silence settled at the table. Sophia looked at Adrian. He was looking at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't name, something careful and old and quiet all at once. You gave that to them, he said. More than you probably know. Evelyn waved her hand. I just did my job. Adrian nodded slowly and said nothing else. But Sophia had seen his jaw tighten, just slightly, just for a second, and she knew, without knowing how she knew, that his interest in her mother had nothing to do with being polite. Adrian drove out of the city on a Tuesday. He told his assistant he had a personal matter to handle and would be unreachable until the afternoon. He didn't explain further. He wasn't someone who owed explanations, and his assistant had worked with him long enough to know that asking follow-up questions was a waste of both their time. The drive was about 50 minutes on a clear morning, the skyline shrinking in his rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, and the road opened into the kind of flat, quiet landscape that Chicago's outskirts produced. Gas stations, storage facilities, stretches of nothing in particular, and then small towns that appeared and passed before you fully registered them. He had made this drive exactly once before, and that was in the other direction, at 17, on a bus with a duffel bag and $40 and no clear plan. He didn't let himself think too much about that on the way out. He was going to confirm something, not feel something. Those were different trips. Route 14 looked the way most things from childhood looked when you returned to them as an adult. Smaller, quieter, slightly faded at the edges. The road itself was fine, but the businesses along it had thinned out over the decades. A tire shop, a farm supply store, a church with a hand-lettered sign out front. And then the building. He almost missed it. The sign was gone, and the windows were papered over from the inside, and the parking lot had developed a serious crack, running diagonally across most of it. But the shape was right. The low roofline, the side entrance, the overhang above the door that had once kept the rain off people waiting to get inside. He pulled in and sat in the car for a moment. Then he got out. There was a woman sweeping the front step of the tire shop next door. She was somewhere in her 70s, working at her own pace, and she glanced at him with the particular expression of small-town people assessing strangers. Not unfriendly, just measuring. Adrian walked over and introduced himself. He said he used to come to the diner as a teenager and was curious about what had happened to it. The woman leaned on her broom. Her name was Carol. She had worked at Millie's for 6 years before it closed, she said, and now her son ran the tire shop, and she helped out when she felt like it. "You're too young to remember Millie herself," Carol said, studying him. "Millie retired in '94. Sold the place to a couple who ran it another 7 years. That's when most of the good staff was there. I came in around 1998, Adrian said. Winter months mostly. There was a woman who worked the counter. Evelyn, Carol said immediately. The name landed in the air between them. Yes, Adrian said. Carol's expression shifted into something warmer. Everyone remembers Evelyn. She was the best thing about that place in its last years. Good worker, but more than that, she actually cared. You could tell the difference, you know? Some people do a job and some people show up. She shook her head. Evelyn showed up. Adrian kept his voice even. Do you remember anything specific about her? How she was with customers? Carol gave him a long look, like she was trying to figure out exactly what kind of question that was. She had a thing about the young ones, Carol said finally. Teenagers, young adults, who came in looking like they hadn't eaten properly. She never made a production of it. She'd just add things, put a plate down and move on before they could argue with her. She paused. I asked her about it once. She said she'd been hungry herself when she was young, and she remembered how it felt to have someone see you. Adrian said nothing. I don't know how many kids she helped over the years, Carol continued. She never kept track. That wasn't the point for her. She just did it because it needed doing. He nodded slowly. You were one of them, Carol said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. Carol studied him for another moment. His jacket, his car, the way he carried himself, and something in her face settled into quiet satisfaction. Good, she said simply. I'm glad you turned out all right. He sat in his car for a long time after that. The truth of it had been there since Friday night, building with each piece of information he collected, but something about hearing Carol say Evelyn's name that quickly, without hesitation, with that immediate warmth, made it completely real, in a way the documents and the records hadn't. He thought about what Carol had said. She'd been hungry herself when she was young, and she remembered how it felt to have someone see you. That was it. That was the whole thing. It wasn't charity in the way he had understood the word growing up, something dispensed from a distance, with conditions attached and discomfort built in. What Evelyn had done was simpler and harder than that. She had just refused to look away. He thought about the winter he had spent going in and out of that diner. He thought about the specific warmth of the place, the coffee, the food appearing without ceremony. He thought about what that period might have become without that anchor. He had built his career partly on discipline and partly on the belief that no position was permanent, that things could always change, that a bad situation contained the seeds of a different one if you kept moving. He had believed that at 17 because he had to. But belief is easier to maintain when someone has quietly decided to make sure you eat. He started the car. He still had to figure out how to handle this, what to say, when to say it, how to do it in a way that honored what she had done, without making it into something uncomfortable for either of them. But the investigation was over. He knew exactly who Evelyn Marchetti was. And he understood, clearly and completely, that she had no idea what she had done. Adrian planned it carefully, not in a calculated way, not the way he planned business meetings or structured difficult conversations for maximum effect, more like the way you approach something fragile. Slowly, with both hands visible, making sure nothing gets broken in the handling. He called Sophia on Wednesday evening. She picked up after 3 rings, which he had learned meant she was at home, but doing something else simultaneously, probably cooking, based on the faint background sounds. "There's a botanical garden on the north side," he said. "The Lakewood. They have a weekend exhibition running through Sunday. I thought the 3 of us might go Saturday afternoon if your mother is feeling up to it." A short pause. "The 3 of us," Sophia repeated. "If that works." Another pause, this one different in quality. Not suspicious exactly, more like she was rearranging something in her mind. "She'd like that," Sophia said finally. "She hasn't been anywhere green in a while." "Good. I'll pick you both up at 2. He hung up before she could ask why, which was intentional. The Lakewood Botanical Garden was extraordinary in late spring. Adrian had been there once before, for a fundraising event, moving through it quickly in a crowd, without really seeing it. On Saturday it was different. The weekend foot traffic was light, the paths were wide and unhurried, and everything was in full color. Roses in long, formal rows. A section of wildflowers that looked accidental, but wasn't. A greenhouse full of things that had no business surviving a Chicago winter, but had been convinced otherwise. Evelyn moved through it the way she moved through the market. Slowly, with complete attention. She stopped at things that interested her and ignored the rest. She didn't perform enjoyment, she just had it. And watching her, Adrian thought that was probably the rarest quality in a person. Sophia walked beside her mother with one hand loosely at her elbow, a habit so natural she probably didn't notice she was doing it. They spent an hour just walking. There was a bench near the rose garden, set slightly apart from the main path, facing a wide bed of deep red blooms. Evelyn sat down with a small sound of relief. Her feet, she said, were making their opinions known, and Sophia sat beside her. Adrian remained standing for a moment. Then he sat on the bench across from them, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at Evelyn directly. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been trying to figure out the right way to say it for about a week, and I haven't found one, so I'm just going to say it plainly." Evelyn looked at him without expression. Sophia went very still. "In the winter of 1998, he began. "I was 17 years old, and I was in a bad situation. My father had died. I had very little money, and there were months where eating regularly was something I had to plan around rather than take for granted." He paused. "I used to walk to a diner on Route 14, Millie's. I went for the coffee because it was cheap and the place was warm, and there was a woman who worked the counter who used to put food in front of me without asking, without making a moment of it, and without ever once making me feel like I was being helped." The garden was quiet around them. Evelyn's face had changed. The assessment was gone, and something softer had taken its place. Not quite recognition, more like the beginning of it. "That was you," Adrian said. "I'm sure of it now. I've confirmed it through other people who worked there. I know it was you." Evelyn stared at him. "I don't know if you remember me specifically," he said. "I don't expect you to. From what I understand, you did this for a number of people without keeping any record of it. But I remember you, and I've wanted to say thank you for 25 years without knowing who to say it to." The silence that followed was the kind that fills itself. Evelyn's eyes had gone bright. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. Sophia had told him that, without knowing she was telling him anything useful, but her jaw had tightened, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. "I just fed people," she said finally. Her voice was steady but careful. "I know that's how you saw it," Adrian said, "but I want you to understand what it was from the other side. You gave me somewhere to land during the worst period of my life. I kept going, partly because of that. I don't know what version of me exists without those months, and without that counter, and without someone deciding I was worth feeding." Evelyn pressed her lips together. "You were just a boy," she said quietly. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his, a firm, brief gesture, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. "I'm glad you're all right," she said. It was almost exactly what Carol had said outside the tire shop. Adrian thought that was probably not a coincidence. Sophia had not said a single word. She had sat completely still through the whole thing, and now she was looking at her mother's hand on Adrian's, and her expression was doing several things at once that she clearly wasn't trying to manage. She had spent 3 months watching her mother slow down, watching the fog come and go, carrying the quiet weight of being the only person in the room who understood what was happening and what it might mean. And here was this man she had almost canceled on 3 times, sitting in a garden telling her mother that she had changed the direction of his life, that she had mattered, deeply and specifically, to someone who had gone on to build something real. Sophia looked away at the roses for a moment. When she looked back, her eyes were dry, but her face was open in a way it hadn't been before. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The week after the botanical garden was different. Sophia couldn't have pointed to a single moment where something shifted. It wasn't like that. It was more like the way a room changes when someone opens a window. Nothing dramatic, just a new quality to the air. Adrian texted on Monday morning. Nothing significant. He had seen a bakery near her workplace that apparently made exceptional cornbread and thought Evelyn might appreciate a loaf. He asked if it was all right to drop it off. Sophia said yes before she finished reading the message. She told herself it was because her mother would enjoy it. They had lunch on Tuesday. Adrian showed up at the restaurant where Sophia worked. Not as a customer, he was careful about that. He waited outside and texted when he arrived, and they walked to a small Italian place 2 blocks away that Sophia had passed 100 times without going in. It was good. The food was simple, and the room was loud enough that you had to lean in slightly to hear the other person, which created an accidental intimacy that Sophia noticed and didn't mention. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. She learned things she hadn't known. that he had taught himself to cook during the period after his father died because it was cheaper than buying prepared food and had ended up genuinely enjoying it, that he had a younger dog named after a street in the neighborhood where he grew up. The dog was currently being walked by his building's doorman because Adrian's schedule made him feel consistently guilty, that he read history, specifically economic history, the kind most people found dry, and could discuss it with the specific enthusiasm of someone who found the subject genuinely fascinating rather than impressive sounding. He learned things too. That Sophia had wanted to study nutrition in college and had partially completed a degree before her mother got sick the first time and money and logistics had rearranged her plans. That she had never entirely let go of the idea and still read about it in her spare time. That she was funnier than she let most people see, with a dry, quick humor that surfaced when she felt comfortable and disappeared when she didn't. By the time they walked back to the restaurant, she was running 4 minutes late and didn't particularly mind. Thursday was different. Adrian had mentioned, without framing it as an invitation, that he ran a small community initiative on the west side, a kitchen and resource space that operated 3 days a week, staffed mostly by volunteers. He hadn't elaborated. Sophia had asked a question, and he had answered it, and somehow by the end of the conversation, she had said she'd like to see it sometime. Sometime turned out to be Thursday afternoon. The space was in a converted storefront, clean and functional, with long tables and a commercial kitchen visible through a service window. There were about 12 volunteers moving through it when they arrived, and the atmosphere was the particular kind of busy that happens when people know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Adrian moved through it quietly. He knew every volunteer by name. He asked specific questions, not how's everything going, but real questions, about a supplier issue one person had mentioned the week before, about whether the scheduling problem had been sorted out, about a family that had been coming in regularly. He listened to the answers and followed up. He didn't perform any of it. Nobody was watching him perform. That was the thing Sophia kept coming back to as she stood near the kitchen doorway. He was the same here as he was at dinner, as he was at the market, as he was at the garden. She had met men who were generous in public and different in private. She understood that distinction very well. This wasn't that. On the drive back, she was quieter than usual. "You've been running this for how long?" she asked. 6 years. Why? He thought about it for a moment, which she appreciated. He didn't have the answer ready. "Because I know what it's like to need somewhere like this and not have it," he said. "And I was in a position to build one." Sophia looked out the window. "Most people in your position don't," she said. "Some do," he said. "I just don't know why I'd do anything else with it." Evelyn had opinions. She delivered them on Friday evening while Sophia was making dinner, in the way she delivered most important things, casually, without looking up from what she was doing, as if the words were incidental. "You keep waiting for him to show you something bad," Evelyn said. Sophia stirred the pot without responding. "He's not going to," her mother continued. "Some people are just what they appear to be. You're allowed to let that be true." "I'm not waiting for anything," Sophia said. Evelyn made a sound that covered a great deal of ground without using any words. "You do this," her mother said. "You stand at the edge of things and look in and decide it's probably safer outside. You've been doing it since you were 19. Mama, I'm just describing what I see." Sophia put the spoon down and turned around. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at her with that calm, unarguable expression she had perfected over 67 years. "He's a good man," Evelyn said simply. "And you like him. Those two things are allowed to be enough to start with." Sophia picked up the spoon again. She didn't agree out loud, but she didn't disagree either, which her mother understood perfectly and chose not to push further. That same evening, on the other side of the city, Adrian sat with his dog on the couch and thought about the way Sophia had looked at him in the community kitchen. Not impressed, not performing being impressed. Just seeing him, he realized, sitting there in the quiet, that he had been waiting for that without knowing it, and that it mattered to him considerably more than he had expected. It started with a conversation Sophia wasn't supposed to hear. She was at work on Wednesday, clearing a table near the private dining area at the back of the restaurant, when two women at the adjacent booth started talking. They weren't being particularly quiet. One of them worked at a firm that apparently had dealings with Adrian's company, and she was telling the other about him in the way people talk about figures they find fascinating but have never actually met. Sophia kept her head down and kept working. "He's incredibly generous," the woman said. "Community projects, charitable foundations, anonymous donations. Apparently, there's a list of causes he funds that nobody even knows about publicly." "That's admirable," the other said. "It is. But someone at the office said it all traces back to some personal thing, a guilt thing almost. Like he's spending his whole life paying back a debt he feels he owes." Sophia set a glass down carefully. "To who?" the other woman asked. "Nobody knows specifically, just that something happened when he was young, and it drives everything he does." The conversation moved on to something else. Sophia picked up her tray and walked back to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment, doing nothing. The thought, once it arrived, was difficult to move. She turned it over through the rest of her shift, through the walk home, through dinner with her mother, and it was still there when she was lying in bed at 11 o'clock, staring at the ceiling. What if everything Adrian had done, the dinners, the market, the garden, the lunches, the way he looked at her mother, was about Evelyn? What if his interest in Sophia was simply the most direct way to stay close to the woman he felt he owed his life to? It wasn't a cruel reading of him. She wasn't trying to make him a villain, but she had spent enough years watching people's motivations quietly from a distance to know that good people could do things for complicated reasons, and that being the incidental beneficiary of someone's gratitude was a particular kind of painful that she wanted no part of. She had spent most of her adult life making sure she wasn't a burden to anyone. Becoming someone's obligation, even a kind and well-intentioned one, was not something she was willing to do. She pulled back slowly enough that she hoped he wouldn't notice. She was busy when he texted Thursday morning, genuinely busy, a difficult double shift, but she didn't suggest an alternative time. When he mentioned the following weekend, she said she'd have to see, which was the kind of answer that meant no, but avoided saying it. She told herself she was being sensible. Her mother noticed by Friday. "You're quiet," Evelyn said at breakfast. "I'm always quiet in the morning. Not this quiet." Sophia drank her coffee and didn't answer. Evelyn didn't push, which somehow made it worse. Adrian noticed by Friday afternoon. He sat with it over the weekend without acting on it, which was his way. He didn't move on incomplete information. But by Monday, it was clear that something had changed and that waiting for it to correct itself wasn't a strategy. He texted on Monday evening, "I'd like to see you. Riverwalk, tomorrow evening if you can. Just to talk." Sophia stared at the message for a long time. She typed 3 different responses and deleted them all. Then she typed, "Okay, 7 o'clock." The river walk was quiet on Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet that a city produces unexpectedly sometimes. The water moving slowly, the lights just coming on, most of the daytime crowd already gone. They walked for a few minutes without talking, which should have been uncomfortable and wasn't. Adrian stopped near a section of railing overlooking the river and turned to face her. "Something shifted," he said. "I'd rather you tell me what it is than spend another week trying to figure it out." Sophia looked at the water. "I heard something at work," she said. "About you. About the charitable work and what drives it." She paused. "Someone described it as a debt, something personal from your past that you've spent your whole life paying back." Adrian said nothing, and I started thinking, she continued, about the timing of everything. Meeting my mother, finding out who she was, and then suddenly being very present in our lives. She turned to look at him. I need to ask you directly. Is your interest in me connected to what my mother did for you? The question sat between them in the evening air. Adrian looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the river. I'm going to be honest with you, he said. Finding out who your mother was, that mattered to me enormously. She did something for me that I've carried for 25 years. That's real, and I won't pretend it isn't. Sophia felt the thing she had been bracing for begin to settle. But, he said, and his voice was different now, quieter and more deliberate, like a man choosing each word because the wrong one would cost him something. I need you to understand the difference between why I came back to your dinner table and why I'm standing here right now. He turned to face her fully. I came back because of your mother. I kept coming back because of you. Those are not the same thing, and I won't let you collapse them into one, because it's easier to doubt me than to believe me. Sophia said nothing. You make me pay attention, he said. The way you move through a room. The way you watch things before you decide what you think about them. The way you love your mother without making her feel looked after. I noticed all of that before I knew anything about Millie's or Route 14. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not asking you to trust me because I said so, he said. I'm asking you to stay and watch. Sophia turned back to the river. The water was dark and steady, and moved without any urgency in either direction. Okay, she said quietly. It was a small word, but she meant it completely. The gala had been on Adrian's calendar for 4 months. It was the kind of event that existed at the intersection of business and visibility. A fundraising dinner for a hospital foundation, attended by the people whose names appeared on buildings and whose handshakes carried weight. Being present mattered. Being absent was noticed. His team had confirmed his table twice. His assistant had arranged the car, and 3 separate people had mentioned in passing over the past 2 weeks that they were looking forward to seeing him there. He had a new jacket for it and everything. The call came on Thursday morning. Not from Sophia, from Evelyn's doctor's office. A reminder about Friday's follow-up appointment. A routine call, except that the coordinator mentioned they had moved the time slot to 11 in the morning due to a scheduling conflict on the doctor's end, and that it was important Evelyn not miss it, given the results they were still monitoring. Adrian had the appointment details because Sophia had mentioned it 2 weeks ago in passing, the way she mentioned most things related to her mother, factually, without asking for anything. He sent her a text. I saw the appointment got moved to Friday morning. Do you have transportation sorted? Her reply came 40 minutes later. Working on it. My usual coverage fell through. I'll figure something out. He knew what figure something out meant for Sophia. It meant she would handle it alone without complaint and be exhausted by the time it was over. He put his phone down and picked it up again 30 seconds later. The gala was Friday evening. The appointment was Friday morning. On paper, they didn't conflict. There were hours between them. Enough time to manage both if everything ran smoothly. But Sophia worked a morning shift on Fridays, and her coverage had fallen through, and getting Evelyn to the medical center by 11 required leaving the house by 10 at the latest, and navigating a part of the city where parking was its own project. He ran through it once in his head. Then he called his assistant. The gala tomorrow evening, he said. I need to send my apologies. Please arrange a suitable donation to the foundation and a personal note to the chair, explaining a family matter came up. A brief pause on the other end. Of course, his assistant said. I'll handle it. He hung up and called Sophia. She answered on the second ring. I want to drive you both tomorrow morning, he said. I'll be there at 9:30. That gives us time to park and get settled before the appointment. Silence. Adrian. The gala is handled, he said, before she could get there. It's not a negotiation, Sophia. I want to be there. Another silence. This one different. "You had that event for months," she said. "I did. Those people expect you. They'll manage." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Why?" she said finally. And it wasn't a rhetorical question. She genuinely wanted to know. "Because your mother has a medical appointment and you need someone in your corner tomorrow," he said simply. "That's the whole reason." He heard her exhale. "Okay," she said quietly. 9:30. He arrived at 9:25. Evelyn was already ready, sitting in the kitchen in her good coat, with her handbag on her lap, which told him she took the appointment seriously, even if she hadn't said so. She looked at him when he came in and gave him a single nod that communicated several things at once. Sophia was moving through the apartment in the efficient, slightly tense way she moved when she was managing anxiety by staying busy, checking her bag, checking her mother's bag, checking things she had already checked. She was wearing her work clothes because she had an afternoon shift and was planning to go directly from the appointment. Adrian said good morning to both of them and asked if anyone needed coffee before they left. Evelyn said yes. Sophia said they didn't have time. Evelyn said there was always time for coffee. Adrian made coffee. The tension in Sophia's shoulders dropped approximately half an inch. The medical center was on the north side, a clean, modern building with good signage, and the particular atmosphere of a place that took itself seriously without being cold about it. They checked Evelyn in and found seats in the waiting area, the three of them arranged in a row with Evelyn in the middle. Evelyn read a magazine. Sophia sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the door. Adrian brought her a cup of water from the dispenser near the reception desk without being asked and sat back down. "She's going to be fine," he said quietly. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But worrying in advance doesn't change the result." Sophia looked at him sideways. "That's easy to say." "It is," he said. "I say it anyway." Despite everything, the corner of her mouth moved. The appointment took 40 minutes. The doctor was measured and clear, and the news was good. The markers they had been watching had stabilized. The adjusted medication was doing what it was supposed to do, and the next follow-up could be pushed to 3 months rather than 6 weeks. Evelyn received this information with the composure of a woman who had already decided not to catastrophize and was pleased to find that decision validated. Sophia received it with a long, slow exhale and her eyes going bright for just a moment before she pulled herself back together. In the corridor afterward, while Evelyn stopped to ask the coordinator a question, Sophia turned to Adrian. She didn't say anything immediately. She just looked at him. Really looked, the way she had in the community kitchen, without any of the usual careful distance. "You canceled a 4-month commitment," she said. "Yes. For us?" "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but the weight behind them wasn't. Adrian nodded. Evelyn reappeared at Sophia's elbow, handbag over her arm, looking satisfied. "Good news," she announced. "Now someone promised me coffee, and I'd like to collect." Adrian held the door open. "There's a place 2 blocks over," he said. "Good coffee, honest food." Evelyn walked through the door looking pleased. Sophia followed, and as she passed him, she did something she hadn't done before. She reached out briefly and touched his arm. Just her hand, just a second, and then kept walking. It was the smallest gesture. It landed like a Jaws answer to a question he'd been waiting on for weeks. 3 weeks passed, the way good things sometimes do. Quickly, without you noticing, until you look back and realize how much ground you covered. Sophia stopped waiting for something to go wrong. It happened gradually, the way most honest changes happen, without a clear moment she could point to. One day, she was still carrying the habit of bracing herself for the withdrawn text, the canceled plan, the version of Adrian that would eventually appear and make more sense of the situation. And then one day she wasn't. She had simply run out of evidence to support the fear, and her mind, practical as it was, had quietly let it go. Her mother noticed first. She always did. "You look different," Evelyn said one morning at breakfast. "I look exactly the same," Sophia said. "You look like someone who slept properly," Evelyn said. "It's been a while." It was a Saturday in late spring, when Adrian asked if she wanted to walk. No restaurant, no occasion, no plan attached to it. Just a walk along the lakeshore, he said, if she felt like it. Sophia said yes, and they drove to the park that ran along the water's edge on the south end, Chicago Lakeshore Park, long and flat and open, with the city behind them and the lake spreading out ahead in the particular shade of blue-green that it only produced on clear days. They walked for almost an hour before either of them said anything meaningful. That was one of the things she had come to understand about being with him. Silence didn't need filling. He wasn't uncomfortable in it, and neither, she had discovered, was she, when the silence was the right kind. They stopped at a stretch of railing near the water. The lake moved in small, unhurried waves, and the afternoon light was the long, golden kind that late spring produced before it hardened into summer. There were families further down the path, a man with a bicycle, 2 children chasing something Sophia couldn't identify. "I want to say something," Adrian said. Sophia turned to look at him. He was facing the water, his forearms resting on the railing, and he had the expression she had come to recognize as the one that meant he was choosing his words carefully, not performing it, just being precise, because the thing he was trying to say mattered to him. "When all of this started," he said, "I wasn't looking for anything. I agreed to a blind date because Dana is persuasive, and I didn't have a good enough reason to say no." He paused. "And then you walked into that restaurant with your mother and apologized before you even sat down, and I thought, this is a person who loves someone more than she's worried about how she looks doing it." Sophia said nothing. "I've been around a lot of people who manage their image carefully," he continued, "who calculate how they're seen. You walked in carrying something real, and you didn't try to hide it. And that was—" He stopped. "I noticed it immediately, before any of the rest of it." The lake moved. "I'm not telling you this because I want something back," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know exactly where I stand. I want a future with you, a real one, built slowly, however long that takes." He turned to look at her then. "I'm not going anywhere." Sophia looked at the water for a moment. She thought about the woman she had been 3 months ago, the one who had almost canceled this into non-existence 3 times, who had stood in front of a mirror in a navy dress, feeling tired before anything had even started. The one who had spent so long being careful that she had nearly managed herself out of something real. She thought about what her mother had said at the kitchen table. You stand at the edge of things and look in and decide it's probably safer outside. She thought about the restaurant, the market, the garden, the riverwalk and what he had said there, the hospital corridor and his hand offering her a cup of water before she knew she needed one, the way he had looked at her mother, with 25 years of quiet gratitude in his face, and said it plainly, without dressing it up. She had been watching him for months. She knew what she had seen. "I spent a long time," she said slowly, "convincing myself that the sensible thing was to expect less. From situations. From people." She kept her eyes on the water. "It felt like protecting myself. But I think I was just—" She paused. "I think I was just getting very good at being alone and calling it independence." Adrian waited. She turned to face him. "I don't want to do that anymore," she said. "I'm done talking myself out of things." The moment that followed was quiet and complete. He reached out and she let him take her hand, and they stood at the railing with the lake moving in front of them and the city at their backs, and neither of them felt the need to say anything else for a while. Evelyn was on a bench 40 yards down the path. She had insisted on coming. Her feet were fine, she said. She didn't need managing, and she had walked with them for the first 30 minutes before announcing she wanted to sit and look at the water, and they should go on without her. Sophia had given her a look. Evelyn had returned it with complete innocence. Now she sat with her hands folded over her handbag, watching the two of them at the railing from a comfortable distance. She couldn't hear what they were saying. She didn't need to. She could see it in the way they were standing, the particular quality of two people who had stopped being careful around each other. She had waited a long time to see her daughter stand like that, unheld by anything, open, present in something good, without one foot already pointing toward the exit. She looked out at the lake and felt something settle in her chest that had been shifting for months, a mother's specific worry, the kind that doesn't announce itself but never fully goes quiet. It was quiet now. They walked back to her bench 20 minutes later, the three of them falling into step together the way they had at the market that first time, naturally and without arrangement. "Well?" Evelyn said, looking between them. "Well," Sophia said. Evelyn looked at Adrian. "You'll come for dinner Sunday," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. "Good." She stood up, smoothed her coat, and took Sophia's arm. "I'm making cornbread." Adrian smiled. "Honest food," he said. Evelyn glanced at him sideways with a look that held warmth and recognition and something that had been building since a Friday evening in a restaurant when a young man had asked a gentle question about a diner on Route 14. "Exactly," she said. They walked back along the lakeshore together, the city bright ahead of them and the water calm beside them, moving toward a Sunday dinner and whatever came after, unhurried, unguarded, and entirely sure of the ground beneath their feet.